So I want to start with a little background on you and Aang. For those who aren't familiar, you and Ted Hope in the early '90s founded a company called Good Machine that became one of the most significant companies in this era of American independent film. And you came on to Aang's first project, which was Pushing Hands, and this movie were he wrote and submitted to a script competition in Taiwan, which provided the other half of the funding. They both scripts won first and second place, respectively. So, how did you first connect with Aang, and then how did this movie grow out of the reception of Pushing Hands? Yeah.
So, well, first, thanks for staying. Yeah, when Ted and I started Good Machine, Ted, for those of you who know him or follow him, he loves lists. And he kept making long lists. And one of the lists that he made was a list of people who had done wonderful short films recently in the last few years, but had yet to make a first feature. And our specialty was called no budget filmmaking. And so our thing was like, we make movies for anything. And on one of his lists was a guy named Ang Lee, who had graduated from New York University as an MFA in film and had made a tremendous short film that Ted found the VHS tape for, called Fine Line. It was Chaz Palminteri's first movie, too, shot kind of on the border of Little Italy and Chinatown. It was a cross-cultural kind of romance and comedy. We called Aang's then agent at the time, at William Morris, who was a wonderful person, we said, hey, we'd love to meet Ang Lee, because it's been 6 years since he made this movie. We just want to see if we could, connect. And they said, he's got a development deal at Universal. He's got a film with Julia Roberts that's about to go. He's got a thing with Giancarlo Giannini. And thank you, but you guys, tough break. And literally 2 weeks later, we got a phone call from this guy who was like, I've won a screenplay competition in Taiwan, and I have $350,000 to make a feature film, but it has to be made on 35 millimeter. And people told me you guys were the only people who could probably pull that off. We're like, Ang Lee? So he came by our offices, which were then above a strip club on Warren Street next to the then World Trade Center. And at 3 p.m., the floors would start shaking as the bumping and grinding kicked in downstairs. And that was just when Aang showed up, and he pitched Pushing Hands. And by pitching, I mean that he spent 45 minutes in a monotone in pretty, rudimentary English, boring us to tears with literally a shot-by-shot description of a movie he hadn't made called Pushing Hands. And we literally falling, and so he left, and I remember Ted turning to me, and, it was like, we definitely needed the work. And I thought this guy was, but Ted was like, wow, that was rough. And I said, well, the good news is this guy is a filmmaker. He's literally already shot this movie. Like, he knows the movie. And Ted was like, yeah. And Ted ended up being the assistant director and the producer with me of Pushing Hands. And that started our collaboration. Pushing Hands needed a bit of work on the script, especially on the English language stuff. So that kind of pulled me into that creative process with Aang. And once Pushing Hands was finished and became quite a sensation in Taiwan in particular, Central Motion Picture and Shu Gong, the great person who was running the film department at that time, said, look, there are, because of the bureaucratic process by which we have to do our P&L, whatever, you have to spend the money on Wedding Banquet immediately. You got to go right into, and we found some extra money for you, so you're going to get like $680,000 for that. The problem was that the script that had won second place, Wedding Banquet, which was lovely, was a very melodramatic, very depressing, kind of formless work that didn't really resonate. It didn't have much of a connection, in particular, to kind of queer community in New York. It was beautiful, but it was like, and we had to start pre-production in about, I think, 4 weeks. And I was reading a book by Stanley, the great Harvard philosopher and film buff, Stanley Cavell, about screwball comedies. And in that book, Cavell says, the weird thing about all these great screwball comedies, The Lady E, Philadelphia Story, et cetera, is that they're comedies of remarriage, not comedies of people falling in love and whatever. They've already fallen in love, they're out, they have to get back together. And I was like, that's kind of like Simon and Wei Tung. And so I went to Ang, I said, Ang, would you mind if I just kind of wrote a new script that's basically the script, it's the story and the world, but that was a screwball comedy? And he would look at me and was like, okay. And that really, we went off to the races on that. So it was really this crazy process of taking that and turning it into a classic Hollywood, but by classic, I mean not Netflix rom-com classic, but classic Hollywood screwball comedy.
Yeah, I mean, as a fan of the films of that era, The Awful Truth, that definitely comes through. So that's awesome to hear. And then this film, when it came out, was had a major reception. Can you talk about the way people kind of like immediately responded to it?
Yeah, it wasn't immediate. We finished the film, and then we sent it to a bunch of international independent film sales agents to see if they would represent it, because we were really happy it got into competition at Berlin Film Festival. So, but we really were struggling. We had very little money to finish it, and we, as a company, a Good Machine, I think we had 5 employees, and we were not able. We had done the calculations, and if the film didn't sell in February, it's almost exactly, Berlin is happening right now, so it's really 32 years ago, I guess, that we would have to close the company down. So when we used some miles or whatever and got on the flight to Berlin, before we got on the flight, and that was back in the day when they had smoking sections on the plane. I'm kind of allergic to cigarette smoke, so you can imagine getting seated in the smoking section because it was cheaper. Telling our staff, we're just going to have to close the company when we get back. It was pretty, and because we'd been turned down by every single sales agent. They were all like, thank you, no. And we're just like, okay, I guess we'll just go and grin and bear it. Back then, the films in competition were shown in West Berlin at the Zoopalast. It was a beautiful old movie theater.
They still show movies there. Yeah,
they do the special
venue.
screenings now, but the competition stuff really is all over at Postnummer. And we sat down. I remember we sat in the very last at the top. It was a very rake like this, and we sat down, and the film started. And I think there was some lame ass joke I wrote within like 1 minute, and the place just went insane. Like Germans, they really go for the dumb jokes, as well as the other ones. And within about 10 minutes, it was like a frenzy in the room. And I started noticing all these distributors like kind of running out of the room. And I was like, oh, maybe what's going on? Like, they were looking for us to buy the movie. And Ted and I didn't have an office. We didn't have a thing, but we literally sat in the lobby of this cheap hotel. This was before cell phones. You had to people would call the hotel and leave messages on a bulletin board for us. And we sat down for the next 4 days and sold every territory in the world. And it started our really, I mean, for me, it was a life-changing event, I think, for all of us. And for Ang too, we sold it to the Goldwyn Company, eventually, who released it and it became obviously what it became.
I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience, but quickly before that, I want to ask, this remake I think this is the kind of movie that's perfect for a remake because it holds up. It's still so funny and well made and yet of its time. And so I'm interested to see the ways in which it's updated. And it's funny, you were telling me last night a little bit about how the reception of this movie has changed a little bit with younger audiences. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a bit and just if that scene was had any reactions at the time, or if that's something that has really developed over the years.
Yes, well, some of you will know what we're talking about. Last night we were chatting, and I said, "Look, it's really been interesting to see the change over time and the reception of the film, but also parts of it. Obviously, I haven't seen it in 32 years. It's the first time I've seen it since Berlin myself, and particularly the scene of the wedding night and the sex in the bed, where one of the people is saying no. So there's really issues of consent and its depiction that come up. And And I have to say that the discussion around that has been really interesting and bracing, and I think really a great discussion. Certainly, we would not have shot that scene the way it was shot and written today. I think there's a version of it clearly, and we'll see if that works. I see appears to in the re-envisioning that Andrew On did that still skirts these issues of agency and consent for sure. But it's back then, no, there was not even an eye blinked in any, as far as I know, in any written or verbal form to that moment in the film that you saw just now. Mainly because, of course, the genders were flipped, right? It was not a woman saying no. It was not a woman saying, "What are you doing?" It was a man, and yet at the same time, and you go, "Oh, well, so that's okay." And then you're like, "No, that's not." It's like, no, it's like literally that just reifies the whole structure, the gender structure around that discussion. So again, I think in very salutary ways, the discourse, as we say, has moved to a place that really is, I think, really worth engaging with and quite salutary.
Yeah, and for me, it doesn't detract from it being a great film. It's I think it's valuable to be able to examine the change in discourse and more as a movie ages and as new audiences engage with it.
Yeah, that's kind of the point of staying alive.
If you have a question, we have some mics in the audience, so why don't you just throw your hand up? I see someone over here. It looks like you got it, yeah.
Hello?
Got it. Thank you for turning that on.
I'm Angie. Loved the film. This is the first time I've ever seen it, so this was really cool. I was wondering, with the new adaptation, since you only had 4 weeks to rework the original, what was it like having, I'm guessing, a lot more money, a lot more pre-production time to do the adaptation?
Oh, in the current, you mean, which version are you asking about? Sorry.
I'm asking about, what was it like to be a part of the adaptation process for the new one, having
for the new one,
a lot more.
Yeah. With inflation, I have to say, and I'm in the presence of Joe Piro, who really spearheaded the production. I think can attest, it didn't feel much more luxurious at all. Quite frankly, quite the opposite almost, which is interesting. I mean, we had a few million more, but we also had just an incredible cast that required flying in and all that stuff. So it was really it felt, I have to say, being on set for Andrew's re-envisioning of the film, it felt very similar to me. It felt very like a bunch of kids putting on a show kind of feel. The set was, the set that Andrew ran with Joe and Carolyn and Edmund, it was so loving. And the cast, Bowen Yang and Lily Gladstone, Kelly Marie Ji-chan, and of course, the older generation, Yoon Yoo-jun and Joan Chen, there was just an incredible sense of family and love on set. So it was just this beautiful, beautiful experience. But it was also a very fast experience and a very inexpensive experience. So in terms of the development, the one thing I would say is, unlike 4 weeks, we actually spent years on the development. Andrew, we were never going to remake the movie. Andrew saw the movie that you just saw because his mom went to Blockbuster and saw the VHS tape there and said, "Oh, this is that Asian movie that all the white people are talking about," and took it home not knowing that it was gay. And Andrew was an 8-year-old kid who was like, watched the movie and like, "Oh, I think I'm gay." Like literally it was that baby, like he just blew up his world. It really, he speaks so lovingly. I don't want to give his anecdotes away, but I'm just dining out on them now. But when he speaks about the experience of being this 8-year-old boy, seeing this movie and just everything opening up for it, and then to have the privilege of speaking with him and talking to him and saying, "Would you want to do something like this?" And he was like, at first he was very like, "Are you, oh my God. And then he came up with these incredible ideas to re-envision and make it contemporary and bring it to someplace new. And I thought that's the greatest homage you can give to Ang, is to pick up what Ang had dropped into the world and carry it further. So I hope when you see it in April, on April 18th on opening night, thanks for helping with the grosses, that you get some of that spirit. So for me, it was the luxury was that a couple of years of real struggle and being brought in to help write it, mainly because Andrew, one of the things he did, and I'll stop about the new one, is he doubled the fun. He kind of made two couples and kind of two sides of the older generation. That is not an arithmetic or an additive thing to do to a narrative. That is exponentially, algorithmically insane in terms of writing the engineering of it. So it really took a long time to crack.
And what were you, you mentioned that you purposely did not revisit this film. What did you remember now having seen it? And what did you remember and what did you not remember?
It's weird because a lot of the stuff that I contributed to the new version was stuff that was sometimes almost word for word things that were from the old version, but I had forgotten, which is a kind of an odd sensation then to see it. Like, oh, wait, what? Oh, did I? Or maybe Andrew, I think a lot of the new version, Andrew probably put more of the old version in than I did, but there were certain things that really hit me as it's hard. It's little like phrases almost. Can
you give us an example without spoiling our experience of
I'll give you one example of something, a contribution that Andrew did that when we were in post, I was like, why is that thing there? And I won't give it a spoiler or whatever. But clearly, there's something that I did that I organized my entire script for the original round. By the way, just so you know, I started with the last scene. I woke up one morning with an image of Dad raising his arms.
That's such an interesting ending.
And it was like that shift to that older generation, right? But also as a locus, so it's a gesture of, he says, when she says, and it was like the only Chinese word I knew because I had written it also for pushing hands, when it was the last word of pushing hands, which is repeated, is mesher, nothing. And I was really into nothing. I'm still really into nothing philosophically, conceptually, like in all ways. And so you'll hear that word repeated towards the end of this film quite a bit. So when he says, what's the matter? She goes, nothing, mesher, I'm happy. And he's like, I'm happy too. But he is happy, and then what is that? So everything about the script was written to engineer into that. And Andrew decided that he was going to give a nod to that gesture. And in a way that when we were even in post, I was like, what? Do we need that? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay. And I was like, oh, wait, I hadn't really thought of those connections. Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? I can't.
There's somebody.
Oh, great. Okay.
Thank you for making the film. I really enjoyed it, and in the film, I noticed a couple of scenes where that it's alluding to the AIDS epidemic at the time happening in New York, and it's a story based in New York, a lot of '90s references, like the Keith Haring shirt. I was wondering, what is it like to be developing a story in that backdrop?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because it really hit me watching it again, just how embedded so much of the, our crew, our team, the culture, the cast, everybody was, and you saw in the thank yous, the GMHC Gay Men's Health Crisis, and was kind of imbricated. That was part of what the process of bringing it to life was all about. And I will tell you this, one of the interesting fissures and anxieties we had in making it kind of tracked all the different parts of the world that I was living in as a filmmaker and as a producer. So I was working with Christine Vachon and Todd Haynes and Tom Kalin on their early work. So I was an executive producer of Poison. You saw the you might have caught the VHS box of Todd's first feature there. And at that point in time, as a good friend, Ruby Rich, very famously at a Sundance Festival the year before, had done a panel on the new queer cinema. And that cinema, which was so important and so formative for all of us, was a cinema that really took on both a political urgency in response to the AIDS crisis, but also expressed that through a very intense look at film form and a challenge to classical narrative form, right? So that these early movies were really pushing boundaries aesthetically and politically and aligning that push. So along comes a bunch of cis het guys like me and Ang, and I'm like reading Stanley Cavell and going, hey, Hollywood screwball comedy, not exactly the most formally transgressive move, right? So politically, the alignment of form and politics was now, that was interesting. And it was actually quite a little bit nerve-wracking because I thought, a lot of people might object to this kind of traditionalism, and even with the family and the baby, and there's really, it's negotiating all of those discussions and putting them in this very, very, you say traditional narrative form, right? So that was a big worry for me, and I really wanted I talked a lot to people about it in the various communities. It was like, yeah, it might be, it'll be fine, and I was like, okay. And when we got back from Berlin and we're readying to release the film, we made sure that our first real screening in New York was for Gay Men's Health Crisis. We did it at the UGA Theater, and it was, that theater seats about 500 people. And I have to say that was a really, I was quite on edge a bit, that there would be a kind of sense of, hey, what are you doing? And why aren't we pushing both these political, and it was, I think, I've described it as maybe the best screening to that time of Ang's life. It was just the most moving response we ever had, and that was really consoling to me as a maker who's not in that community per se, but adjacent and working with. I hope as an ally. But yeah, we were, yeah, it was a process. I hope that answers your question.
Others?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's kind of a joke, but if you've seen German comedies like Der Schuh das Manitou or whatever, but they also have sophisticated comedy. I mean, Ernst Lubitsch and Billy Wilder, we can say, pretty sophisticated. But we really, I think one of the things that was an issue is this is one of the first, by the way, films. I think it's the first feature film that I know of that was edited using a new technology called Avid at the time that had only been used because the amount of memory and RAM you could use to do that kind of nonlinear editing in a computer was really limited to commercials. And our genius editor, Tim Squires, who's since gone on, of course, to an incredible career, is also just a genius tech head. And he said, hey, guys, I can save the production $20,000 and not do dailies. We don't have to print dailies. We'll just literally scan into this little thing, computer thing, and I'll edit on the computer. Well, that was great, except that none of us had seen the movie except in literally the most down-resed. I can't even. It was just fuzz, and until we actually cut the negative for the film. So it was just crazy. So when we were showing it to people, they were watching it on just like these little tapes off of the thing, and I think that it was just it didn't work, But when you had a group, a big audience, it just was a whole different experience. We didn't expect it. We just literally didn't know. Oh, there's a hand.
that last scene in the airport with the father holding his hands up, I had to check the date on when the movie came out because they didn't know if it was maybe a reference to anything like post September 11th or whatever. And I just wonder, I don't know if you talk about it, but in the new version, does that, it just, I know I just checked, it was 93, but it just seems so loaded as a scene. And it's just, yeah, it's just almost like foreshadowing in a way.
Yeah.
I remember a former CIA director told me once he was making a joke after 9/11, because I guess we did that then, but he was saying some of the ways that we're going after other countries is like, it's like that movie Airplane. It's like you're frisking the nun, when, the quote unquote obvious terrorist is right next to you. And just with everything going on right now, it just seemed so shocking to end this movie on that scene and watching it now. And I was wondering kind of also what your response was to it, seeing it again today like that.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I think I thought of that image because I had just been in an airport, and that's, they didn't have the things you walk through. You had to raise your hands and all that, so it's just there. And but yeah, the other one image is of course the Twin Towers behind the table where they're tabling for Act Up, right? And friends of mine in that scene. So it's really, I had a lot of feels watching it again, I must say, based on that. But no, I never associated what you did just now, the ending, with kind of that transnational security state, paranoia, future, present. Yeah. No, but there is a running structure to the movie that many of you catch that Americans certainly probably don't. And that was in the original, the melodrama, which of course the unification, the Taiwan-China unification metaphor, right? She's from the mainland, he's from Taiwan. And there's a bunch of jokes, at the wedding, we're going to liberate, and I'm liberating you, all that. So there's a lot of this language that's embedded in a kind of sense of, are we together? But no, the together's fake. We're really different. But we need to be together. And I think that political discourse also drove a lot of the reactions to the film in Asia.
Right, and the father, who we haven't mentioned, played by Sheng Lung, who's in all three of the first films and really core to them. His character has a backstory not dissimilar, if I'm correct, to Aang's father's.
Yeah, we call the first three films, of course, the Father Knows Best trilogy. Sheng Lung, who is just an amazing human and great actor, and he is clearly echoing some of the experiences of Aang's father's family, which was thought to have been pretty much kind of done, destroyed during the revolution, and of course his dad came as a Kuomintang person to Taiwan. They were settlers there.
I want to make sure we can take one more question up there.
Thank you. It's a really short question. So I noticed An was in the scene of the wedding. Like, did he volunteer to do so? Like, what's the story there?
Yeah. He's the guy who, by the way, turns to his Guaylo friends and says, "You're witnessing 5,000 years of sexual repression." That's Aang kind of giving you the theme, right? It's like, in case you didn't get it, there it is. He also, for 11 movies, every movie asks me to do a cameo, and I have declined every single one. Just saying. So yeah, he recruited himself during that. The Wedding Banquet sequence we shot in Queens at the Sheraton, which was owned and managed. It was a franchise at that time by some folks from Taiwan who were just great. So the spirit of that sequence was really also in the production, with some differences. Like when they bring all that lobster out, like everything, we had this war room where we charted every course of the banquet. So for every shot, because you don't shoot in sequence. So like, oh, it's number 4. And then they would come back out with the lobster. So everything was covered in glue. The room smelled like glue because of the lights. So it was so everybody's kind of getting high on the glue, I think. And then because Aang's, at that point, one of his favorite Chinese restaurants was, have figured out that he was there, and he was already from Pushing Hands, kind of a mini celebrity. And that meant that at lunch break, the lunch would show up for Ang, and he had, of course, was going to share it with me because he was laughing all the way, which was, of course, his favorite dish at the time, which was stinky tofu. I had never had it before, and I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" So on top of the glue, there was that. It was just a lot. It was a lot. It was a lot going on there. Yeah, I've actually forgotten your question now. The glue. There's something happened.
Amazing. It was just about his cameo. That's great that the whole production around it comes back to you like that. Yeah. Before we wrap up, I just want to make sure to ask you about how your relationship with Ang has evolved over the years, because you worked together on so many films. And I'm just, to me, that's such a profound level of creative partnership. I'm wondering how it changed over the years, how it fed into the subsequent films.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a 4-month course of therapy answer to give you, like if you have a few months. But it's just been beautiful. Like if you've seen, because we've been together, Ang's not here today, but we've been, and things do change, lives do change. And we have found separate paths the last decade as he's really embraced in the last couple of films the technology and these kind of bigger Hollywood films. And I after I left Focus, or I got fired from Focus, thank you, started really going back to this new generation, younger generation, really working my way back up in a sense with these smaller films and relearning the craft that way. And somehow that path has brought us back together. So I'm starting to write a new film for him, I think, next week, which would be kind of wild, really fun. And
can you tell us anything about it?
No. I really can't, because I literally will be killed if I say anything. But it's just really, and I have another project that I developed with him that we're coming back to. He really wants to get back behind the camera. It's been 7 years, almost 7 years. And so he's really out there reading and looking at stuff, and we're talking about a lot of things. But and the next one may well not be with me. We don't have a sense of ownership over each other. We don't have that sense of proprietary thing. We never really did. There was never a deal or a thing or even an assumption. It was just like stumbling from one movie to the next. But the thing that I've always loved most about Ang is that even though I think he's pretty much the most, in a small handful, let's say, of most accomplished filmmakers in the world, every new film is freshman year at film school. We sign up and we just keep learning. And he retains that spirit, and I think that's what's kept us together. It's not like just you do this and I do that. It's like, what are we doing? And so that sense of adventure and sometimes fear, because you really are going places that you just don't know how you're basically making problems for yourself that you have no idea how you're going to solve when you start, is I think what's kept us together as friends and collaborators over the years.
Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on, and I want to thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the. Thank you all.